All right, how's it going, y'all? So today we're going over what is the single most important thing to have if you're looking to have multiple video editors, and that is a NAS. We're going to be talking about the two best options out there for video production, Synology and TrueNAS. These are NASs that you can use both for editing and archiving your footage, and essentially what they will do is they will act as that file repository. So you'll stick your DaVinci Resolve project, your Premiere project, your Final Cut Pro library. You will stick those all on a NAS, and you will have multiple computers all being able to access that same shared file system. And depending on the software you're using, which editing system you're using, you will be able to actually, in some cases, even be able to have multiple editors in the exact same project working on them at the same time. Having a centralized NAS means you're never carrying hard drives back and forth between editing bays, and you know everything that's on the server, everybody has access to. It is great for being able to have multiple people working on a project, and it also is a great way of making sure that you're not reliant on a single drive failing, and it makes it very easy to back up and reduce out duplicates. Because you're not having people copy and pasting drives all the time. Oh, I need this file. Oh, I need this file in their projects. Instead, everybody's pointing to the exact same shared storage and everybody has access to it. So having a NAS for video editing is huge, especially when you want to have multiple people editing at the same time. And the way you do that is with a NAS. So there are two brands out there that I think are probably the best options for video editors, Synology and TrueNAS. And they both will give you a similar product, a file server that you can put either SSDs or hard drives in it, and a web interface to manage them, as well as the ability to essentially have everybody's computer map the network drives and connect directly to it and edit over the network. So the files never have to be stored on their computers. Instead, they are just streamed straight on in, and all of your NLEs out there support working directly off of a NAS, and they support it very well in most cases. While both Synology and TrueNAS do the same thing from a 5-mile view, there are really different options out there, and in most cases, there's really one that's going to be better suited for most people rather than just it being a toss-up. When it comes down to it, it really comes down to how much storage you need, how much extra features you need, and how much performance you need really is the deciding factor when you're looking at having these different options, because Synology is incredibly easy to set up, but TrueNAS has capabilities that Synology just never will when you're looking at those massive file systems and getting incredibly fast performance out of them. For Synologies, you can start all the way at a 5-bay or even a 2-bay, and these things for smaller production houses can be great. You could stick like two 8 terabyte SSDs in two of these, and then three 24 terabyte hard drives in there, and now you have a 50 terabyte archive and an 8 terabyte editing workflow where it's all in a really small package. And it's easy to start. It does not take a lot of actual setting up time and figuring stuff out, and they makes things really easy. TrueNAS, on the other hand, is not really going for that small business market really at all. If you are very tech savvy, you can absolutely build it yourself, but for the most part, if you are looking to deploy TrueNAS, you probably need an IT guy. And I would say if you're deploying a Synology, you probably do not. So before we get into the pro and con list where we really go into all these things, I do want to talk about the major difference between Synology and TrueNAS. Synology is both an operating system as well as an ecosystem and product. While there are hacks where you can install Synology on anything, it's not supported, not something I would recommend doing. So when we're talking about Synology, we are not just talking about Synology DSM, which is the operating system and interface that you use to change your settings. We're also talking about the physical NASs that you have to buy from Synology. So to use a Synology NAS, you have to specifically buy a NAS from Synology. And the difference there is with TrueNAS, TrueNAS is fully open source and is designed to be run on any hardware. Right behind me in my rack, I have nearly 300 terabytes of usable space in a TrueNAS server that I built buying old parts from eBay. And it runs great, it has incredibly high performance, and pretty much every video you've seen posted on this channel for the last 3 years has been done using that server. And It is wickedly fast and completely overkill for a studio like mine. So with TrueNAS, you have the ability to literally buy server components or use your existing server components to install this NAS operating system on it. But you also have the ability to buy one from IX Systems, IX Systems being the parent company who really maintains the TrueNAS project, and also will sell you dedicated TrueNAS hardware that is fully supported and has extra bells and whistles and things like that, and has been validated from them and has that X, Y, and Z tier of warranty. So it is up to you. And if you are looking to buy a TrueNAS system from IX Systems, we are resellers. Check out the link down in the description below for that, and we can actually help with that. So we really do both. I deploy a ton of Synologies, and I deploy probably fewer, but higher performing TrueNAS systems. And that's the big difference between them. And so with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start with our pro and con list. And really it's going to be more of, hey, who is better at this thing? And to start, we're going to start with ease of use. And hands down, this goes to Synology. Being that fully integrated product system and having really great operating system, Synology is incredibly easy to use. And that is why it is so popular in the video production industry. Synologies might not have the top of the line hardware for the money, but from an ease of use perspective, anybody can set them up for a video production house, which is not something I can say about TrueNAS. They're just so easy to get up and running that there is a huge advantage for that. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up on my laptop the interface for TrueNAS and the interface for Synology DSM, so you can kind of see the difference between them. And really there's a massive difference in just how easy they are to set up and use. All right, so both TrueNAS and Synology have really easy to use web interfaces that we can see right here. But Synology's, in my opinion, is far more user intuitive, and there's just less things you have to worry about when setting it up. For example, I can just pop into Storage Manager, you get a really nice view of everything, you can see everything going on, and you get really great, easy to read performance metrics that allow you to actually do things very quickly without trying to have to figure out extra things. TrueNAS has a very different interface, and I think it is a little bit harder to use and understand, and you can also get yourself in trouble in a way that you just can't with Synology. Synology will keep you from doing anything stupid in most cases. If you're going to do something that is going to break it, they're going to give you tons of warning and lock you out of doing it. But TrueNAS sometimes will let you do things that can come back to bite you later. And I have had people with TrueNAS accidentally cause data loss by hitting the wrong button or saving over something incorrectly in a way that doesn't really happen with Synology. If you know what you're doing, they are both incredibly safe systems and really solid from a data integrity perspective. But Synology really locks you out of doing anything stupid, whereas TrueNAS does not give you as many warnings as Synology does, and I have seen it. Setting up shares is a little bit more complicated. First, you have to go through and actually go ahead and create a data set. Then once you've created a data set, you can then go ahead and enable it as an SMB share. Then you have to go ahead and add your permissions on top of that. And there's just a lot more layers when you're setting up TrueNAS versus with Synology. As soon as you create a share, it just automatically does everything. And the only question is, where do you want it? Volume 1 or Volume 2? And who do you want to have permission to it? And so from an ease of use perspective, in pretty much all cases, Synology is going to win. This is the reason why you buy Synology, is it allows you to save on IT costs and just get something up and running really easily, and they are pretty tanky. Next up is going to be actual expandability, which is really key in video production. And this is where Synology and TrueNAS have different pros and cons. Both of them are expandable, but in different ways. So TrueNAS uses a thing called ZFS, whereas Synology uses BTRFS for its file system. And they both have very similar features, but also have very different capabilities. In a lot of ways, that's what sets them apart. They both have great data integrity and the ability to have snapshots and roll back to them and copy on write file systems. Things that really make sure that a bad power loss doesn't wipe out all of your data and other things like that. But because of the way that Synology uses their RAID, you can actually just add drives to expand out later on. And they also have a thing called SHR, which allow you to actually have multiple disk sizes and actually get used efficiently. If you're somebody who's on a tight budget and really wants to be able to expand and add drives later on, and maybe you don't care as much about performance, SHR1 and SHR2 can be very flexible. What they allow you to do is start with maybe 2 4 TB drives. Then let's say you're realizing you're having a lot more data, so you can start buying 20 TB drives. And then you add 2 20 TB drives. Well, with a standard RAID 5 configuration, you could do that expansion where you add 2 drives later on or 1 drive later on to a RAID. But the way RAID 5 works, and same thing with the analog, which is RAID Z1, they pretend like every single hard drive in that group is the size of the smallest drive. So if you've got 2 4 TB drives and 3 20 TB hard drives, it is just going to pretend like you have 5 4 TB hard drives and you're missing out on a bunch of space. With SHR, it'll actually be able to use much more of that space. SHR1 instead just takes your largest drive and takes that away for redundancy. So Synology is going to be a lot more flexible when it comes to that kind of expandability, where you're able to add it piecemeal. And as long as you're staying under 100 TB, I would say that Synology is a lot more expandable than TrueNAS. However, TrueNAS has a massive advantage in the fact that it is running ZFS, which makes it infinitely expandable for the most part. This right here is my TrueNAS server, and I made a video a couple months ago about how I bought 8 24 TB hard drives, and all I had to do was just plug them in and expand, and now I just grew my space. It didn't take any time. I didn't have to go through and increase the space gradually. It was online, ready to go immediately. And I can do that 5 more times. The way ZFS works, there is no appreciable upper limit on the amount of space you can have in one of these things. And the way they expand is incredibly efficient. So because of that, if you're looking for these massive build outs, TrueNAS is going to be way more expandable. I have deployed multi-petabyte TrueNAS servers. And not only that, they're super fast. This is just something that Synology and BTRFS are not able to do right now. They can't have that crazy massive expansions. And with Synology, because of the way the RAID works, you don't want to have a RAID that goes between 2 units. So say you have your primary NAS and an expansion unit on the side. You kind of need to set up 2 different pools, 2 different groups, because you want to make sure if the power goes out on that expansion unit, it doesn't crash the main volume. With ZFS, because of the way ZFS handles everything, it has so much data integrity that is okay. It is still recommended to have all of your VDEVs in a single chassis, but it is totally fine to have that happen because ZFS will detect it and just offline the pool in a read-only way and say, hey, I can't do this. And then once you plug it back in, it just comes right back up. Okay, so that was expandability. It's really up to what you need. If you need those big deployments, ZFS and TrueNAS are just going to win every single time. But for the smaller stuff, I do think Synology is just easier to expand for regular users. And now we're going to get into what is probably the most critical piece to these larger groups, and that is performance. And this is honestly where TrueNAS is going to win just about every single time once you move on to the larger units. That's because TrueNAS runs a thing called ZFS, as we talked about a lot here. And what ZFS does is it has a lot of very fun, really great features for video editors in terms of caching. And ZFS has 2 types of caching. They have RAM caching, which is called the ARC. And then they have an ability for an NVMe or SSD caching, which is called your Layer 2 ARC. I'm going to simplify these down a lot, but essentially TrueNAS has a very smart algorithm on your data. And it's constantly tracking, hey, which files are being requested? And so it is trying to keep as much of the important data in RAM as possible. And it does this way better than other file systems do because it's keeping track of not only what has been used most recently, but how often have things been used. And so things that are used really often, but maybe not super recently, will stay in that ARC. Then it also has the Layer 2 ARC, which with NVMEs is a game changer. With NVMEs, you can basically have a 1 petabyte video editing hard drive NAS that very quickly has the performance characteristics of editing off of SSDs. That's because the way ZFS works is you can say, hey, as stuff comes out of that RAM cache, go ahead and stick it in this NVMe cache. Have it on these really fast NVMe drives, and if I need it in the future, I'll grab it from there. The thing is, video editors have a very specific workflow. You're going over the same clip over and over and over again, and so even if your RAM doesn't have enough space to store your entire massive project, you can very easily afford NVMe drives that probably can fit that in there. And you can tune it so it's flooding it and keeping those recently used projects on NVMe drives for super fast pullback. Where this really matters is scrubbing through a timeline. And that is where you really get that great performance out of it. If you're building one yourself, you can also put whatever hard drives and CPUs in there, as much RAM as you want in there. So you really have that capability to really build out incredibly powerful TrueNAS servers. This right here is my video editing TrueNAS server and also runs a ton of VMs and a whole lot of other stuff for the office. And you can see I've got 128 gigs of ECC RAM in there. So essentially while we're working on projects, the majority of the time, it's just hanging out in this RAM cache. And so 90% of the time, when I'm requesting a file scrubbing through a timeline, it is being fed from RAM, not from the SSDs that it has to pull from. And that is what makes it so performant. When you have a lot of users hitting it, you're able to have more and more of that data already just in the RAM, and so it can be fed right back to users without having to go to the slower spinning disks. Now, Synology does the same thing. It has a RAM cache, and it's got the ability to do SSD caching. However, the algorithms that it uses and the way it works just really lends itself better for video production to the way ZFS does it with TrueNAS. You can definitely get a lot of performance out of sticking 128 gigs in a Synology, and it's probably going to cache most stuff, but your SSD caches are just not nearly as efficient, and doing something like a backup will wipe the entire cache because Synology does not use that intelligent arc that TrueNAS does. Instead, it just uses what's called most frequently used. So anything that's been used most frequently is kept. And so if you do a backup, well, now all of your stuff has been looked at and the entire RAM is useless. So that's just where ZFS does it better. And that is why you can get so much more performance out of a TrueNAS system. But at the same time, at the smaller levels, I do think you can get incredibly great performance out of a Synology, especially if you're not needing more than 5 video editors at the same time. Honestly, you're probably not going to notice the difference unless you're pulling some really heavy footage off of the NAS. So I will definitely give performance to TrueNAS, but that's really just on that super upper end. On the cheaper sub $1,000, sub $2,000 prices, you can get great performance out of either one of them. Speaking of which, we now need to go into price. And this is once again where it's kind of hard to say. So Synology is actually very cheap and very cost effective when you look at servers. If you look at comparable things from Dell, it is so much cheaper to buy Synology, and TrueNAS is somewhere in the middle. For a really upper end enterprise unit, I think TrueNAS is probably on the order of 20% more expensive than a comparable Synology. And that's really in terms of just total space usage. I do think Synology is the most cost effective if you're buying from IX Systems or Synology respectively, so buying from the actual owners. The thing about TrueNAS is it is bring your own hardware. So if you want to go the route of bring your own hardware, you can go on eBay and buy a used server and piecemeal it together for way cheaper. Now, this is not easy to do, and you do kind of have to know what you're doing, and you can end up spending hours and hours and hours debugging things that just are not working right for you, which I have done absolutely with my current TrueNAS system, but it also came in far cheaper than I could get with a comparable Synology, and is just so much more expandable. Synologies, especially in those like sub 100 terabyte units, are very cost effective, especially for video editors. You are going to get really great bang for your buck compared to what you could probably build yourself unless you're using old components and already really have a great grasp on it. But if you're somebody who has components lying around, you know what you're doing, you want to be able to build something and upgrade it as time goes on, you can build your own TrueNAS server and have as long of a life as you want it with and upgrade components as needed. And if you have a server and you just need more space, boom, you buy another $500 JBOD and you can add in an extra 24 drives. Stuff like that is what makes TrueNAS a lot cheaper if you're going that path. But if you're buying directly from the companies and going to get new firsthand stuff that's IX Systems approved, I think it's probably cheaper to go Synology, but it's not a bad idea to get quotes from both, especially if you want a system that is ultra expandable. All right, so now our very last thing is the reason why you buy a Synology. I've said a lot of great things about TrueNAS, but the last thing on our list is doing more. That's the only way I can think of it. And this is where Synology is going to win hands down. Synology has DSM. It has packages. It has tight integration with just about everything in there. And that is the reason why, even if you can get better performance at a cheaper price for a TrueNAS that you build yourself, a lot of time I will recommend people go Synology because of the doing more. Synology is not just a true file server. It's not just a way to access files in the local network, but instead has a lot of server features that give you the ability to share files out with clients, sync with another remote office, and things like that that are natively built into the operating system that you just don't get with TrueNAS. TrueNAS really only supports a few ways of accessing your files, and pretty much all of them are local. If you want to be able to send files to a client directly from your TrueNAS server, well, now you have to install a package called Nextcloud to do it. And then you're also running into an issue where now it doesn't really sync up with a local file system because there's not the hooks in there, so you have to update it, and you're not tightly integrated. With Synology, you just install Synology Drive, right-click and say Share Link, and can send a link to share. There are so many other cases with that being true, and that is what really sets Synology apart. You can run Docker containers and virtual machines on both systems, but it's all of the packages that come built in and directly integrated into DSM that truly set it apart. You can go ahead and easily back up your MS365 or your Google Workspace directly to your Synology for free. Same thing with any computers in the office. You can set up easier backups. You can set up easier replications. Honestly, there are just so many features that come built in and expandable through the package center on Synology that it's really hard to end up going that TrueNAS route. So many video production houses need more than just a SMB server to store their videos. And that is where Synology comes in and just has all of those features built in. So specifically for video editors, Synology has Synology Drive, and that is probably the number one thing I deploy with video editors who are trying to do more than just have everybody in the office. And that turns your NAS into a Google Drive or a Dropbox, where you can either share files directly out of it, or also have your editors sync files to their computer. So if you've got remote editors and your projects aren't huge, you can get them a hard drive at their house that syncs with your NAS. And that way they can be editing remotely directly off of it. There's other ways of doing it, and a lot of times I will use something like Parsec, but just those capabilities and those features and those really easy add-ons make it very easy to recommend Synology, because so often it's like, hey, I need to do this thing, I need to send files like this. And with Synology, it's a 2-second thing. With TrueNAS, you have to start saying, well, we could do this, well, we could do this, well, maybe we could do this. And that is really what separates Synology and makes it there. Realistically, Synology's hardware is nothing fancy. Their boxes are good, but they're not incredible. The thing that sets Synology apart is the fact that you have the ease of use with DSM and those extra packages that can add a ton of value depending on what you're needing to do, especially on a smaller production. So if you're not needing massive scale out stuff with tons and tons of people, the limitations that Synology have probably are not going to be running into you. and you're going to fight with it less and be able to get more out of it than you would with a TrueNAS system. But if you're already very computer savvy and you are deploying this for massive scale out and incredible performance and want to be able to go in those like 500 terabyte level plus, then TrueNAS really is that, because that is where Synology is really weakest. For most people, there's not a wrong answer, but a lot of times there is a right answer. Both NASs will suit your means, but depending on what you're looking to get out of it, one of them probably will be a lot better, and I hope throughout the course of this video, it was very clear which one was right for you. Well, I work on these systems for video production houses all the time. If you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. If you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. And have a good one. Bye.